Okay, so here we are. This is the first lecture, and Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is money in the Fed Reserve, or money in banking. And as usual, I've got just a few articles I just want to talk about briefly, and I've got a short video for you. It's only 4 minutes, and then we'll get on into the chapter. But this is a couple days ago, Wall Street Journal, and it headline here says, "Free trade loses political favor." And just the first sentence reads, "After decades in which successive Republican and Democratic presidents have pushed to open U.S. and global markets, resentment toward free trade now appears to have upper hand in both parties." So, what is this all about? We are going to talk about trade and the advantages of trade and disadvantages of trade, and in a later point in this course. But one of the causes of the Great Depression was the Smoot-Hawley tariff, passed in 1932, which was the highest protective tariff in our nation's history. Now, there are reasons for trade restrictions. If you want to be specific, then you can find good reasons for trade restrictions. However, if you're going to have trade restrictions, for the sole purpose of trying to stimulate jobs, then it doesn't work that way. All that you get is more unemployment, not less. And the reason's very simple. When we put tariffs or restrict trade, restrict imports from other nations, that increases the price of those imports. I mean, that's what restriction of trade does. We restrict trade, we put tariffs or quotas against any imports. That raises the cost of any foreign country importing into America, and when their costs go up, they have to raise their prices. And when prices go up, say, many things that we buy as Americans are from foreign countries, right? Many of the things that we buy are from foreign countries. So if the cost of importing those goods, one interesting thing, by the way, is that there are many American companies that manufacture in foreign countries. But despite the fact that these are American companies, if a product is produced in a foreign country and that product is imported into America, then if we put a tariff up against those products, then we're hurting the American company. But the bottom line is that tariffs ultimately raise prices. And with an increase in prices, buying power goes down. And with a decrease in buying power with the average consumer, then we get more unemployment. That's just the way it works. And another bad thing about it is that trade restrictions, especially for the wrong reasons, can lead to a trade war. If we were all in separate countries, and I put tariffs against, or quotas against your products, therefore I'm going to buy less from you, or I'm going to increase your costs, then what you're going to do is you're going to say, well, if you do that to us, we're going to do that to you. And so you put tariffs up against American products. And then other countries do the same. And then we put more tariffs. And next thing you know, we have what's called a tariff war. And no one wins a tariff war. It's like a currency war. No one wins a currency war. No one wins a tariff war, because all it does is raise prices, decreases buying power of the average consumer, and produces more unemployment and a sluggish, no-growth economy. Anyway, I just thought I'd point that out. Another article here. Any questions about that, by the way? Another article here. It says subprime auto loans flash signs of trouble. And it says the 60-day plus delinquency rate among subprime car loans that has been packaged into bonds over the past 5 years climbed to 5.6%, the highest level in nearly 2 decades. Well, the 60-plus delinquency rate among subprime car loans. Now, what's a subprime loan, first of all? Well, a prime loan is when a company, like a bank, lends money to very credit-worthy people. A subprime loan is when credit companies, like banks, lend money to people with poor credit histories, where the risk of repayment is a lot higher than would be for a prime loan. And one of the causes of the financial collapse in 2007 is the abundance of subprime loans, especially in those days it was with the housing market. But now we're getting a lot of subprime loans in the auto loan market. It says here, let's see, delinquency rate among subprime loans that have been packaged into bonds. And what does that mean, packaged into bonds? Well, this is something that I've explained before, that when a bank makes a loan, like a car loan, instead of keeping that loan and receiving payments over a period of time, the bank sells that loan to somebody else. And then that somebody else packages a bunch of loans, like in this case it may be car loans, packages a bunch of car loans into now this paper calls it a bond, but it's a collateralized debt obligation, and then sells that off piecemeal to investors. And this is exactly what happened again in before 2007 with the housing market, which led to the collapse back then in 2007, 2008. Anyway, it says the rate of missed payments is higher for loans made in more recent years, reflection of more liberal credit standards and the larger number of deals from lenders serving less creditworthy customers. So anyway, it's kind of a repeat of what happened back in 2007. And the third article, just very briefly, it says here inflation. Well, anyway, first of all, are there any questions about what I said about auto loans and repackaging loans into bonds and selling them off and subprime loans? All right, the other article says inflation target draws fire from all sides. It says central banks over the past 2 decades pursued a 2% inflation as a standard. Now, we had just got off Chapter 4, which was on demand and supply, correct? And we talked about how markets work. So what this is an example of is that when the monetary authorities have a target, like in this case, they say, well, we're going to have a target of 2%, but one of the things that Article points out is that a lot of monetary authorities can't always agree on how to do that. When authorities like this try to force the market to do something that it doesn't want to do, that normally leads to problems economically. See, our interest rates today determined by market forces. No, they're determined by monetary authorities. So monetary authorities try to thwart the market. They're trying to make the market, make interest rates do something that the free market doesn't want to do. And every time we do things like this, then we get problems. Anyway, that's any questions about that? These are just a few articles that I've tried to point out to you. I've got a video for you then. Let's see. You could think you're going to find this interesting. See, this chapter here is about money and banking, and what this video talks about is what fiat money really is. The American dollar is what is called fiat money. That's not backed up by anything.
This is Andy in Denver. I'd like to take a few minutes of your time to show you how we have been deceived. We have been hoodwinked. Our money was changed at one point and has caused a lot of issues that we see happening today. What I have right here is a silver certificate, good for $1, and a Federal Reserve note, also good for $1. The silver certificate has a blue seal, the Federal Reserve note has a green seal, and there's a lot of similarities between the two. George Washington is on both pieces of paper, as are the words the United States of America and $1, and other various decorations all over the paper. But there's a key difference between these two pieces of paper that we should take note. On the silver certificate, it promises something in fine print. Above the large print, it reads in fine print, "This certifies that there is on deposit in the Treasury of the United States of America $1 in silver payable to the bearer on demand." So there's fine print at the bottom as well, below the words $1. So this piece of paper is saying that you can redeem it for $1 in silver coin. Now that could be a 1-ounce coin, that could be 2 halves, 4 quarters, 10 dimes, whatever the denomination, you could get $1 in silver coin for this piece of paper at one time. The fine print says so. And note that it says $1 in silver payable to the bearer on demand. $1 in silver. That indicates a measurement. So this is good for a measured amount of $1. Now let's look at the Federal Reserve note in contrast to the silver certificate. It too says $1 on it, but the fine print is missing. There's nothing below the words $1, and there's nothing above the United States of America. Instead of saying, "This certifies that there is on deposit in the Treasury of the United States of America," it just simply says, "the United States of America." And instead of $1 in silver payable to the bearer on demand, it just says $1. What it doesn't tell you is $1 of what? There is no measurement, there is no promise to pay out anything. The piece of paper is claiming to be $1, but it's not claiming to pay you $1 in anything. So by removing the promise to pay, how does the paper become what it once promised to pay? Let's look at this another way. I have a mock-up coupon here and a mock-up note. This coupon, like the silver certificate, says coupon redeemable for 5 oranges at Fred's Federal Grocery Store. You see that 5 oranges is in large print, and then there's fine print above and below the 5 oranges. This indicates that this piece of paper is redeemable for something. Now if we look at the 5 orange note, all it says on it is note and 5 oranges. How, by removing the redeemability, does the paper become what it once redeemed? To put it another way, if you had a certificate or coupon good for 5 oranges, how much orange juice can you squeeze from one 5 orange note? I'll give you a hint. None. So by removing the promise to pay something off the paper, they've made the paper become what it once promised to pay. This is deceit, it is a lie, and the Federal Reserve note is a nullity. It has no value, it's not redeemable for anything, it's a debt instrument. It says Federal Reserve note at the top instead of silver certificate. It says note. This indicates that you owe somebody something, which in fact you do. Every Federal Reserve note that's in circulation is a liability. There's nothing redeemable for them. They can be inflated at will. And this is one reason we are so in debt as a nation today. That's all I have for now. Thank you for your time.
Let's see. What, so I'll find that interesting?
Are there still the dollars with the fine print in circulation, or did they take all of them out?
Yeah, you mean silver certificates?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I was going to talk a little bit about that. back in the early 1960s, President John F. Kennedy thought that the money authority ought to be the U.S. Treasury and not the Federal Reserve. Now, the Federal Reserve is more or less a private corporation. It's not a government entity. And instead of our money being controlled by banks, private banks, he thought that the government ought to issue money. So he arranged for silver certificates to be printed, and a great deal of them were actually in circulation. If that's what you're talking about, that they are in circulation. And there was a plan to have first ones and then fives and then tens, and eventually, you see, replace Federal Reserve notes with real money, silver certificates. But he was assassinated in September of 1963, and soon after, a couple months after, all the silver certificates were taken out of circulation. So that's a story with silver certificates. And today, all we have is Federal Reserve notes. And what is a note? Well, a note is an IOU. See, so our money is simply debt driven, but there's nothing. Some economists don't even call it money. They call it currency, but in a true sense, it's not really money because there's nothing backing it up. It's what's called a fiat currency. By the way, if my memory serves me right, and I didn't look this up before the lecture, so I'm not sure, but it's Executive Order 11112. That was the executive order that John F. Kennedy issued to make possible silver certificates. And that Executive Order 11112 is still the law of the land. It's never been repealed. But we don't practice it. So any questions about that? It's interesting, if you look up Executive Order 11112, you'll find all kinds of information on John F. Kennedy and silver certificates. Anyway, that's a bit of history. So let's then get to the chapter. Here is Chapter 5, Money and the Federal Reserve, and I'll go slideshow from beginning. And we start off with what is barter. The practice of trading one good or service for another. See, the point here is that if we don't have money, then how do we work together? How do we get something that we don't have? And the only way to do that is to trade. And so when you trade with someone, you would have to barter. You know, you've got so much of certain things, and someone else is something that you want, and you try to exchange. If they've got something you want and you've got something they want, then you try to come to an agreement and exchange, and that's what's called barter. In fact, there's a theater in Abington, Virginia, called the Barter Theater, and the reason it's called the Barter Theater is that it was established back in the Great Depression of the 1930s, and at that time people didn't have much money, and so the theater would accept goods in kind as payment. You know, like 3 chickens or a dozen eggs, or so many vegetables. I mean, and see, that was barter. That's what barter is. Barter Theater said, we'll trade you a showing for this play in exchange for goods in kind, and so they named themselves the Barter Theater. Anyway, I think that's interesting. So what is a double coincidence of wants? Well, what barter necessitates is what is called a double coincidence of wants, a situation in which two traders are willing to exchange their products directly. See, the problem with barter is that you've got to find someone that wants what you've got, and that same person has to have something that you want, and that's not easy, especially if you've got something big that they want, but maybe they've got something small. I mean, it's very, very difficult. And so that's why we have money. See, money eliminates the necessity of a double coincidence of wants. So what is currency? Anything that can be used to signify someone's credit and someone's debit in a financial transaction. Now, there are many definitions of what currency is. I'm using the word currency instead of money, but we're talking about like in our case dollar bills. So what is it really? Well, if I had a $20 bill and I gave you that $20 bill, what does that $20 bill represent? Well, what that $20 bill represents is that you're $20 better off financially, and I'm $20 worse off financially, correct? So it's a physical representation that I'm $20 poorer and you're $20 richer. Now, anything that does that, anything that shows a debit and a credit, can be used as currency. This is what digital money is. When you write a check, or if you have a debit card, and then you at the store, then what happens? Well, if you buy $100 worth of groceries, well, your account is debited by $100, and someone else, and the store's account is credited by $100, and so that's money. See, anything that does that is money. So you don't have to have anything tangible like dollar bills. It's simply credits and debits. And what are the basic functions of money? Well, in other words, what is money? What are the advantages of money? Well, money, the four functions of money is that, number one, it can be a medium of exchange. Let me see, a medium of exchange. Money is accepted in exchange for good or service. And so when we talk about money, usually that's what we think of. What money is, that it's something that we can use to buy things. That's called a medium of exchange. So that's one purpose of money, but there are other purposes. Another purpose of money, the reason societies have money is used to compare the relative value of different goods and services. It's called a unit of account. If I said that a Ford automobile is priced at $20,000 and a Cadillac is priced at $40,000, then how much is the Cadillac worth relative to the Ford? Well, it's worth twice as much. Well, how do you know it's worth twice as much? Because that's how I use money. See, I said the Ford is valued at $20,000, the Cadillac is valued at $40,000. Therefore, you know that the Cadillac is twice the value of the Ford. Now, see, notice here that I'm not using money as a medium of exchange. I'm using money as a unit of account, so that we can put value on things and compare the value of one thing as opposed to the value of something else. That is a second function of money. And another function of money is that money can be used as a store of value. Once you have money, you can save. In fact, savings in economics is defined as money earned but not spent. That is the definition of savings. So if you earn money but you don't spend it, you by definition you've saved it. And how do you save it? Well, that's where money comes in. See, money can be used as a store of value. You're storing value with money. And money also, the fourth purpose of money is that it can be used as a standard of deferred payment. Money is used to keep track of the method and the amount of money to be paid back in the future. Now this, of course, happens when you borrow money. If you borrow money, let's say you borrow money to buy a car. Well, there are certain terms that if you borrow money from a bank, well, you have so many years, and they had to tell me they had to leave early, so I appreciate that. At least she did. Anyway, if you buy a house, same thing. Borrow a car, same thing. I mean, every type of loan has a different way of calculating when you're going to pay back the money, how you're going to pay it back, and all of that. But see, without money, you couldn't do that. Now, one thing you should know, and this is a little bit of personal finance here, not really economics per se, but let's say that, let's talk about mortgages. Let's say that you borrow $100,000 and you pay 10%. So your interest rate's 10%, and you borrow $100,000. Okay, now how much interest do you owe the first month? Anybody know how you figure that? Well, the way you figure that is you say 10% of $100,000 divided by 12. And that's how much interest you owe the first month. Okay? Now, what I'm explaining to you is the calculation method. See, we couldn't do this without money. And now, how much interest do you owe the second month? Well, do you owe $100,000? The amount of money you owe in the house, is it $100,000? No, because the first month you paid a little bit toward the principal, correct? Now, most of what you paid was interest, but you paid a little toward the principal. So let's say you paid $50 toward the principal. Well, so how much interest do you owe the second month? Well, you go 10% times your outstanding balance divided by 12. Now, why do we divide by 12? Because that's the way the loan is set up. See, it's a method. And since you're making monthly payments here, mortgage loans, this is the way that the interest is calculated. And then third month, and the fourth month, and fifth month, it's the same until the loan is paid off. It's always 10% times the amount owed divided by 12. Now, this is how much interest you pay, not what your payment is, not what your total payment is. Now, what is going to be your total payment? Well, that depends on the lender. Okay, that depends on the lender, and the higher your payment. In other words, the more you're paying above and beyond interest, then the quicker you're going to pay off the loan. That's why a 15-year loan on $100,000, you're going to pay a lot less money than on a 30-year loan with $100,000. Okay, so what your payment is, banks again use a certain formula, and they always do it the same way. But what I'm trying to tell you here is that this is one use of money. See, money can be used to calculate. All right, you borrow money, you pay it back over time. How much are you going to pay back over time? How is interest determined on credit cards? That's interesting. Now, this varies a little bit from credit card to credit card, but with most, maybe most credit cards, let's say you owe $10,000 and you carry over a balance from month to month, and let's say that your interest is 20%. Now, how much interest do you owe the first day? Well, you go 20% times how much you owe divided by 365. Okay? So that's how much interest you owe the first day. Now, if you don't pay that, then that's added to your principal. So how much interest do you owe the second day? Well, now you owe more the second day than you did the first day. So however much you owe the second day, you go 20% times that amount divided by 365. But you don't make a payment the second day. So how much interest do you owe the third day? Now, y'all get the picture? You go 20% times how much you owe divided by 365, and that's added to your how much money you owe. And that continues every day, you see, until you make a payment. And that's how interest is charged. Now, some credit cards charge interest by the minute. I mean, they can actually do this. You know, every minute that they don't get a payment, then that amount is added to how much you owe. So if you carry over balance from month to month and you get a bill from your credit card company, and let's say you've got 20 days to make the payment, does it make any difference if you make the payment the day you get the bill or wait for another 10 or 15 days? Well, sure, it makes a big difference. It makes a big difference because every day that you don't make a payment, you owe more money. If you paid X amount of dollars, doesn't have to be in total, but if you paid X part of it, you make a payment, then that much less money is going to be added to your total balance. Does that make sense? Some people don't know that. Well, again, that's things that we talk about in my personal finance course. But again, it's just an example of using money as a standard of deferred payment. Okay. And what are some properties of money? I mean, what money has to be scarce, for one thing. Anything that's not scarce is free, and if money were free, then it wouldn't have any value. Money doesn't have purpose unless it has value, and so the more scarce it is, then everything else being equal, the more value it's going to have. Okay. You know, through the practice of quantitative easing, and I've talked about this several times before, our monetary authorities have been greatly increasing the supply of money by billions of dollars, in fact, trillions of dollars over the past several years. So if they create money out of thin air, you know, all the Federal Reserve has to do is push a few keys on the computer, and they create money. Then why has this not caused inflation? And I've talked about this before, but some things I just know it's a good idea to repeat. And the reason is that has money for us, as a result, become more or less scarce? And the answer is, well, not really. How come? Because the only way we're going to get inflation is that if our money supply in our system, talking about the American economy, increases relative to goods and services. So despite the fact that we have created huge amounts of money, at least, our monetary authorities, the Federal Reserve in this case, most of that money has not gotten into the system, into the American economy, into our pockets as consumers. And therefore, money has not become less scarce, and therefore we have not had, a lot of inflation as a result. Now, where has a lot of this money gone? These billions and billions of newly created money. Where Where has it gone? Well, most of it has gone into the derivatives market, which is the largest market in the world. I've talked about this before too, right? You know, what's the GDP of the United States? About 14, 15 trillion. What's our national debt? About 20 trillion. How much derivatives does Citibank own? 62 trillion. How much derivatives does Deutsche Bank in Germany own? 75 trillion. See, that's where all the money's gone, into the derivatives market. It hasn't gotten into our pockets. And therefore, despite the fact that we've created huge amounts of money, we have not experienced inflation, at least not much. Anyway, that's it's a big explanation there in terms of the property of money and being scarce. The more scarce it is, then the more value it will have. If it becomes less scarce, if it becomes more plentiful, then the value of each one goes down, and therefore it takes more of them when we buy things. Okay? Portability. Money has to be portable. Money has value when, or it's more useful if we can carry it around. And money has to be divisible in order to compensate for all kinds of different transactions. So that's why we've got $100 bills and $50 bills and 20s and 5s and 10s and 1s, and then you get down to quarters and dimes and nickels and pennies. See, that's what's called divisibility. So money has to be divisible. Of course, more and more of our money is virtual, right? All the time, less and less of our money is physical, with Federal Reserve notes, and more of it is just digital. It's just debits and credits on a computer somewhere. You get paid when you get a job. Instead of getting a paycheck, well, twice a month, or your bank account is credited by X numbers of dollars, and then you spend that. You can have a debit card, and you can spend it. And again, when you don't have cash and you use your bank account, then it's just debits and credits, and it's just on a computer somewhere. So it's just digital money. That's what most of our money is. It's just ones and zeros on a computer somewhere. And we talked about before, why is there a movement to eliminate high denomination bills? Like in Europe, there's a big movement to eliminate high denomination bills. In America, there's a movement to take out $100 bills from circulation. And the purpose of that was to make it more difficult for people to save. Anyway, and of course that's the first movement, the first stage in eliminating currency altogether. I mean, could we have a cashless society? I mean, could we eliminate dollar bills, Federal Reserve notes completely? Yeah. But what would be the danger, personally, of the government doing that? Well, it would be worth something still, because it's still, it wouldn't change the. It's money still is just ones and zeros on a computer. So if all money went virtual, it wouldn't change that. Control is the key. The control is the key. If all money were virtual, and the only way that we had to buy and sell was virtual, went through the banking system, then if we did something the government or the monetary authorities didn't like, what could they do? They could simply delete our account from the system, and that way we couldn't buy anything. See, right now, if you have cash, well, no matter what happens, as long as that cash is accepted as a medium of exchange, you no matter what happens, you can go buy things. But if the only way you can buy is virtual, and your account is simply taken off the system, then you can't buy. And so it's all control. It's a way of controlling the population. Does that make sense? All this has got to do with money. We're not off the topic. This is right on the topic. It's all about currency and money, and what is money. So what is commodity money? Anything that serves as both as money and as a commodity. Like during World War II, in the prisoner of war camps, cigarettes was often used as money. In the early colonial days, tobacco was used as money. In other words, if we use something for money, but it also has another use, like if you've got a cigarette, well, you can use that as a means of exchange, or you can smoke it. So that's what's called commodity money. And anything can be used as as money. I mean, again, it has to have certain purposes, and it has to be divisible and portable and things like that. So what is token money? Money that exceeds the value from which it was made, for example, quarters. See, why would we not want the amount silver in a quarter to be worth a quarter? And certainly not more than a quarter. Okay, we got quarters. Now, maybe let's suppose there's a certain amount of silver in that quarter. But how much is the metal worth? Well, the metal in a quarter may only be worth 3 or 4 cents. And that's what we want. The reason that we don't want the amount of silver in a quarter to be worth a silver or more than the silver, once it was worth more than the silver, what would people do? Yeah, they'd get a bunch of quarters, melt them down, and sell the silver, right? You can make a profit. So if the metal in a coin is worth more than the face value of the coin, pretty soon we don't have any coins. Does that make sense? So this is what is called token money. A quarter is a quarter because it's 1/4 of a dollar in terms of value. But a quarter is worth a quarter because we say it's a quarter of a dollar, not because of the silver, not because of the metal content in the coin. There was a time before strong central governments during the Middle Ages when people used gold and silver to exchange, and in the Roman Empire, once you had a strong central authority, you could take gold or silver and you could make coins out of that. But what gave those coins value? Well, what gave those coins value back in those days was the silver or gold content in the coin. But that's not true today with token money. Okay. Now, another name that comes to my mind is that you may run up against it's a term called debasement of the currency. Like, for example, back in the well, this was common anytime you had kings and queens and money that was not token. The king or queen could. What was a common practice is that they would take, let's say, a silver coin, and then they would melt the coin down and take most of the silver out of the coin, put a less valuable metal in place of that silver, and then refashion the coin to make it look like the original coin. Although, it may be a little bit smaller, or may simply I mean, there's lots of different ways to do it, but when those in authority that have the authority, when they take money, like especially coins, and then they extract value from that and replace it with something else of less value, we call that debasing the currency. Okay, that's just an economic term, debasing the currency. See, and what are examples of money? Federal Reserve notes. Now I say money. Again, some economists don't even call Federal Reserve notes money. They call it currency, but not money, because it's a fiat currency. It's not backed up by anything. But anyway, examples of money is Federal Reserve notes, our dollar bills. By the way, see, it says Federal Reserve note. If you look at a dollar bill, every dollar bill along the top it says Federal Reserve note. And what is a note? A note is an IOU. So how did that note come into existence? Well, the only way for dollars to come into existence is to be loaned into existence, because it's debt. See, our whole currency is a debt-driven currency. That's what it says across the top, Federal Reserve note. The Federal Reserve creates money and then lends it out and earns interest. That's the basis of our money system. Our money system is lent into existence, and interest is charged. All right. Anyway, coins, of course, checks is money. Traveler's checks can be considered money. Debit cards is money. Credit cards is not money. Now that's interesting. Why would a debit card be money, but a credit card not be money?
Because debit takes out from your bank account right then, and then credit takes out later or something like that.
Well, you're close. Yeah, you're close. You're on the right track. With debit cards, if you use a debit card, then your account is debited right away. But if you use a credit card, it's not your money. You are actually borrowing money from someone else, and therefore it does not fit the definition, the strict definition of money. Credit cards can be similar to money and can be used as money, but technically, economically, it's not, because it doesn't meet all the qualifications of money, because it's borrowed and instead of being taken out of one's bank account. Anyway, what does the term liquidity mean? The easier something is to spend, the more liquid it is. The more difficult it is to spend, the less liquid it is. Now, this concept of liquidity is going to be very important once we get into our banking system. You've got to understand liquidity in order to understand our banking system. So something is very liquid if it can be easily spent. Liquidity has got nothing to do with how much value something has, but it only pertains to how that something can be used in terms of money. For example, some of the wealthiest people in this area are people that don't have much money. Well, how can you be wealthy if you don't have much money? Well, in this area, one of the more wealthy people are people that own land and maybe have these large farms and has farm machinery and has cattle and other animals, and and things like that. So see that they are very wealthy, but they're not liquid. They can't go to a restaurant and take their chickens to pay for their their dinner. So you can be very wealthy but not be liquid. Now, if you're not liquid, then what you got to do in order to spend, in order to buy things, you've got to turn whatever your assets into money, and then you can go spend it. And the more you have to actually spend, then the more liquid you are. Now, not the more wealthy you are, because liquidity has got nothing to do with wealth. It's got everything to do with the form of which your assets are in. The easier it is to spend, then the more liquid you are. And now I might say, what is the well, this is the next question. Which form of money is the most liquid? And a lot of people would say, well, dollars is the most liquid. But that's not true all the time. I mean, can you make your car payment with dollar bills, or can you rent a car with dollar bills, or can you go to most hotels and pay for your hotel with dollar bills? And the answer is no. So in many cases, dollar bills are not liquid. Now in other cases they are. Checks can be liquid in some cases, but maybe not in other cases. I mean, if you go to your local restaurant, maybe you can pay for your dinner with a check, as you're a local person, and maybe the restaurant owner knows you, and everything is, well, you're local. But if you go to a foreign city and try to pay for your meal with a check, they probably won't accept it. So a check may be liquid in your hometown, but it may not be liquid somewhere else. So cash is not the most liquid form of money. So there really is no most liquid form of money. See, it depends on the circumstance. Sometimes cash is more liquid. Sometimes debit cards is more liquid. Sometimes checks are more liquid. I mean, it depends on the circumstance. Fiat money, we've already talked about with our dollar bills. Money not redeemable for any commodity. Its status as money is conferred by the government, I say. Maybe I should have said by the monetary authorities, because the monetary authorities are not always the government, like in our case. But fiat money is not redeemable as a commodity. Silver certificates are money because they're redeemable for silver. See, that silver is a commodity. But Federal Reserve notes is only fiat money because it's not redeemable for silver or gold or anything else. And all of the world's, well, that's a strong word, all. I don't know of any exception anyway, but I'd say, I'll say all. Money of the world is fiat money. The world is on the same song page in terms of money and banking. All countries do things the same way. So, I mean, I don't know of any. I mean, maybe there is. I just don't know of any country that has real money that's not fiat money. And what is legal tender? Currency that constitutes a valid and legal offer of payment for debts. Now, normally I have a dollar bill on me. I don't have even a dollar on me today. But if you look at a dollar bill on the left-hand side, it says that this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. Now, what does that mean? This note is legal tender. Well, let's say that I borrow $1,000 from you, and okay, I borrow $1,000 from you, and I say I'm going to pay you back a certain time in the future. So that time comes, and I give you 10 $100 bills. And you say to me, I don't want to accept these $100 bills as payment for your debt. You say to me, I don't recognize these pieces of paper as payment for your debt. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Professor Long, you still owe me $1,000. Now, what can I do? Well, I can go to the law. I can take this case to a court. And what's a judge going to say? Well, a judge is going to say, well, Professor Long, you did make good on your debt. You did make payment because the laws of the land recognize these particular notes as payment of debt. And that is what helps give our dollar bills value. See, they're legal tender. What legal tender means is that the laws of the land, the courts, recognize these, I say pieces of paper, but it's really not paper, you know. Bills are, it's a linen, really. In Canada, they're actually plastic. The loonie is, it's really strange. If you've ever seen a loonie, that's what they call their money in Canada, loonies. But if you ever see a loonie, it almost looks like play money because it's just a cheap plastic. At least our money, you know, is linen. It's something, you know, you can wash our money. You can, if you don't like dirty money, you just put it in the washing machine and wash it, and then you can iron it and make it look real nice. But anyway, we call it paper, but it's not. But now what was I saying? Oh yeah, the laws of the land recognize these pieces of paper as payment of debt. And that's what makes it legal tender. Now it says this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. Now if I owe you $100,000, that's a private debt. But what's a public debt? Well, a public debt is money owed to some government. See, private debt is money you owe to an individual. Public debt is money you owe to a government. So legally, if you owe taxes, for example, can you pay your taxes with dollar bills? Well, legally you can. Now, things don't always work out this way, but legally that's what it says. It says this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. So again, this is what helps give. I mean, despite the fact that our currency is not backed up by anything, you know, it's fiat currency. What helps give it value is this statement. It's the fact that it's legal tender. Does gold or silver back up our money? And by now you know that it doesn't. If we were on the gold standard, then money would be backed up by gold. You know, at one time it was. Our money was backed up at gold, and our money was backed up by silver at different periods in our history. So see, what John F. Kennedy tried to do in the early 60s, 1960s, was not the first time that would be the case in America. He was trying to bring back the way that we did things at certain periods of our history. But he was unsuccessful, of course, because of his assassination. What happened in 1968? U.S. and a number of European nations stopped selling gold on the London market, allowing market to freely determine the price of gold. See, it was in before the World War II, we were on a gold standard, and there are different stages. It's not as simple as just one date, but in stages, and this is one stage, but not the final stage. The final stage came in 1972, but there were, since World War II, there have been stages where the world has relied less and less on gold as a payment of debt, and this is one of the things that happened in 1968. U.S. and European nations stopped selling gold on the London market, allowing the market to freely determine the price of gold. So we're separating. Governments relied less and less on trying to determine the value of gold because it became less and less of a factor in their money system. See, now what happened in 71, and I do believe this is, it could be the right date. Maybe it's the right date. I'm not sure if it's 71 or 72, but from 68 to 71, only central banks could trade with the U.S. at $35 an ounce. Finally, in 1971, even this bit of gold convertibility died. So it was in 1971, under President Richard Nixon, that the gold window was shut completely, and so the final nail was driven into the coffin of the gold standard in 1971. That we after 1971, there was no longer any tie between money and gold. That's what this is saying. See, we're going to talk about the Bretton Woods agreement in 1944 and how we use gold as a standard. But I'll wait till we get there. Why does money have value? It's useful and relatively scarce. See, everything that has value for the same two reasons. I mean, why does this computer here have value? Well, it's useful, right? And it's relatively scarce. Why does that door over there have value? Because it's useful and it's relatively scarce. See, everything has value for the same two reasons. So I might say, well, what gives this computer monitor value? It's useful and relatively scarce. What gives this chair value? It's useful and relatively scarce. What gives a dollar bill value? It's useful and relatively scarce. What gives that door value? It's useful and relatively scarce. In other words, there's nothing special about money. Money is just something else that is useful, and because it's relatively scarce, the combination of being scarce and useful gives it value. But there's nothing special about money. It's just something different. The only difference between money and that door is that they have different uses. Period. That's the only difference. There's nothing special about money. What determines the value of money? The general price level. I mean, what really determines the value of money? Well, what really determines the value of money is what we can buy with it, correct? So the higher the prices go of the things that we buy, what happens to the value of money? It goes down, right? Our money, our buying power goes down, the value of money goes down. So it's the price level. If prices go down, then the value of our money goes up. We can buy more things with lower prices, correct? So what determines the value of money? Exactly, the general price level determines the value of our money. And now this brings us to banks. So, the first part of this chapter was on money, and the second part is on our banking system. So we're going to leave talk of money per se, and now talk about our banking system. So why are banks called depository institutions? Because they accept deposits from the public. We call banks depository institutions because people deposit money in banks. Now, of course, why are worldwide, why are people depositing less money in banks? Because, negative interest rates, or at least low interest rates, but in some cases negative interest rates. In days gone by, when one of the incentives of put money in the bank is that you could earn interest on your savings, whereas now interest rates are so low that there's a less reason to deposit your money in a bank, especially with negative rates. With negative interest rates, you actually, instead of the bank paying you interest, you got to pay the bank interest. So if you deposit $1,000 in the bank, then it's guaranteed that you're gonna be able to withdraw less than $1,000. That's what negative interest is. Now, would a free market ever reach a point where we had negative interest rates? No, that's strictly something that the monetary authorities are forcing on the market, but it's something that would not exist in a free market. And these low interest rates are, I should say when, some people say if, but when we have an economic collapse, if you ask me, well, what was the real trigger that led to this economic collapse? And I would say quantitative easing and low interest rates. That's really, we'll talk about this later in a later chapter, but that's really the stimulus that is going to cause all kinds of economic problems, and something that we have forced on the system, something that a free market would never do. But we have forced this, we have manipulated it, and it's going to cause all kinds of problems. For one thing, one of the articles I read was the subprime market in auto loans, and see why are so many lenders and investors striving so much to increase the return that they're making, and they are willing to take great risk. See, with a subprime loan, there's more risk. If you lend money to a credit-worthy person, well, you're not taking much for risk because you know they're going to pay you back. But if you lend money to a non-credit-worthy person, and many of these car loans, I mean, I didn't read you the whole article, but if you read the whole article, some of these loans that are being packaged are already in default. People have already, stopped making payments, and so it's very risky. You see, well, why are investors willing to do this? Because of low interest rates. If interest rates were higher, many of them would simply earn those higher interest rates. But with interest rates being artificially kept so low, that more and more investors and lenders are willing to take huge risks, you see, in order to get a decent return on their money. But the greater the risk, then the greater chance of an economic collapse. I mean, what are the chances of someone not paying you back if they don't have a job compared to lending money to someone that does have a job? I mean, the possibilities are much greater if the person doesn't have a job, right? Well, see, that's what's happening in our economy. See, a lot of the money being lent out is money that is being done so in areas that they have they're high risk areas, and so the economy is skating on very thin ice as a result. And what was the impetus of those risky loans? It was the monetary authorities artificially keeping interest rates low, and in some cases even negative. Anyway, what are commercial banks? Depository institutions that make loans to the public. Now, I don't think I mentioned this in these slides, but we have something that is called the shadow banking system. And what the shadow banking system is institutions that lend money to people, but they're not banks. Like General Electric, not that long ago, was a major player. In fact, about 40% of their income came through lending money. So General Electric, being it's not a bank, was part of what is called the shadow banking system. Okay, now General Electric no longer General Electric has divested itself of their banking entities. And the reason is that the Dodd-Frank law, because of their lending money, they came under the strong thumb of the federal government, and it was so restricting that even though General Electric was making huge amounts of money on this business, they sold off this business in order to get out from under the heavy hand of the federal government. Anyway, that's part of the called the shadow banking system. What are demand deposits? Accounts at financial institutions that pay no interest, on which deposits can write checks to obtain their deposits. A demand deposit is you put money in your checking account and then you write checks against it. And so what we're saying is that you were making demands on your deposit. You put money in a checking account, you make demands on that by writing a check, so we call that type of deposit a demand deposit. See, there are other types of deposits, like if you put your money in some other type of deposit, there may be restrictions on that. Like it may be a deposit that would say, well, we're going to pay you a certain amount of interest as long as you don't withdraw any of your money for a certain period of time. Well, see, that kind of account is not a demand deposit, because you're not able to make demands on your money without paying a penalty. But with demand deposits, you're not earning interest normally. I mean, there may be cases where you are, but I doubt it in this day and age. Anyway, that's what's called a demand deposit. So how do banks make a profit? After interest paid or services rendered minus costs equals bank's profit. Now, what banks normally do historically is that they would take in money, pay us a low interest, and then lend our money out at a higher interest. And then from that higher interest, they would pay us, and the difference would be profit for the bank. But see, banks don't do that so much anymore. See, but banks, a small part of banks' business is lending money to people. Most of their money is in the derivatives market. See, that's one of the reasons why Americans are not as well off as they should be, because the money isn't getting down into, the banks aren't lending. I mean, why should a bank lend money out at almost 0% interest if they can take the same money and park it at the Federal Reserve and earn a higher interest with no risk? Because the Federal Reserve pays interest on money that commercial banks deposit at the Federal Reserve. So since the Federal Reserve is paying the interest that is at least equal to, but sometimes greater than, the amount of interest a bank can get by lending us money, why should they lend us money? And why should they lend us money at 0.5% interest if they can make 10, 15% interest in the derivatives market? Y'all get the picture? See, who's bearing the cost of this system? It's the common person. Because the common person, banks are not performing their traditional function of taking deposits and lending money out to the public. They're not doing that nearly as much. In fact, they're almost not doing it at all. Y'all find this interesting? Well, it's time to go on that cheery note. So we'll continue this next time. I'll see you all next time.